Howdy. Welcome to my talk. Just because it's crazy doesn't make it wrong. Bringing your hacker point of view to the election hack discourse. I haven't really thought of myself as a hacker much because the only things I've managed to break and get under the hood and break are my clients' websites, and then I have to be the one to fix them, and so it kind of cancels each other out. But then I read this. Ho ho! Well, if that's what being a hacker means, well then, yes, I am one. I too know the dark arts of right-click view source. Maybe I have creds after all. Still, I have to admit, I'm about to talk about things that I have no experience with other than being a voter. So now might be a good time for this slide. I need to say I'm the only one responsible for the opinions posted in this talk. I have no election administration experience whatsoever. I have downloaded all 1,065 pages of the state of Texas election code for what that's worth. I haven't read it, of course, but I did do a search for risk limiting audits, and guess what? It says that Texas will start doing them in 2026, so that is good news. Okay, now, back to the talk. We all belong to tribes. We like people in our tribe. We hate people in the other tribe. Why? My personal opinion is I think it's because no one has time for that many friends. Also because our lives are short, no one has time to really understand everyone's point of view. It's just logistics. It's easier to write off the other side as crazy. Another theory of mine is that the big tribes of yesterday used to be sports teams. But that got confusing when the teams started moving around, and then the geeks started to rule the world, and everyone knows geeks are sports challenged. Sure, some of them might ride bikes and run marathons, but that's really not the same as team sports, is it? So anyway, geeks ruined it for everybody, and so now we've all streamlined our tribes down to just two: the Republicans and the Democrats. And also a handful of sour grapes who keep trying to start other tribes and just end up ruining the election for the losers who thought they would have won if it weren't for the sour grapers, as if I fall into the unfortunate last category. This is because I come from a family that is literally half Democrat and half Republican. By refusing to align with either of the major tribes, I get a lot of crap from everyone for how I vote. But I also get a lot less crap shared with me on social media, so I figure like it's a net win. Anyway, that's the way it was, at least until all this election hacking grief started. The losing side of the family, oh my word. They were all boo-hooing all the time, saying how the country was going to be ruined forever, never the same. All the media they watched, all their social media channels, all their email chains, all they could talk about was how the election was hacked. So that's all my whole family ever talked about. It was infuriating. 2016 was so infuriating. 2016, do you remember that? That was in the before time, so it seems like a long time ago. But you get my point, right? Here we are, 5 years later, 2021. The official story right now is that the hacking was mostly of the social engineering kind and mostly on social media. But if you remember in 2016, that distinction was not made at all. I have a graphic about that. 2016. The blue people were all like, yeah, the election's hacked. And the red people were like, oh, stupid blue people. And then 2020 happened. And now the red people are like, oh, the election's hacked. And the blue people are like, stupid red people. But we can look on the bright side. Election security is now a bipartisan thing. So let's dive into it. All right, we are told this is a truth, that this election in 2020 was the most secure election in U.S. history. We're also told that that bar is kind of low. But I want to ask the question, is it really? I have to wonder, honestly, what is that bar actually? Have we defined it as a society? Do we know exactly what that is? How can we measure something that we haven't completely defined? I can't honestly answer all of that yet, but for myself, through the research I've done through this talk, I've kind of come to my own conclusions, and they're not exactly where I thought they'd be when I first started. I have a question for you. Are you worried about elections? If you are not alone. Smart people have been worrying about our elections for a very long time. Here's this guy's worries. And this is from 1859. I want you to notice the quotes that he frets over. Vote early and vote often. I didn't realize they were saying that back in the 1800s, and it was already like a thing. And then the other one that he says, how to cast the greatest number of votes for the smallest number of voters. You know, I think that one needs to make a comeback. That's very, very pithy. The other phrase in his statement that I want to highlight is where he says at the beginning, in the excitement of great popular elections, frauds will be committed if a chance is given for them. Okay, so isn't that the core of what we want to figure out when we're looking at accusations of election fraud? Was a chance given? And if it was, if somebody took advantage of that chance, what would the impact be? Another thing he expresses is a fear that we have all felt at some point, that the worst side will prevail. That fear comes from somewhere. That fear has been a reality at several points in our history. And that's kind of a dark thing to contemplate. So I think now is a good time to re-answer a question I got at Dallas Hackers in September about mental health. I did a 5-minute lightning talk and I got this excellent question that I gave a really crappy answer to. So the question was, how do you protect your mental health while diving into election security? Here's my do-over answer. That is a great question, and we should always be asking that question before we pour ourselves into something that is socially stressful. You don't want to break yourself while you're trying to make the world a better place. I'm not wise enough to answer for everyone, but I can at least share with you some of the things that I try to do to keep my mental health. The first one is to protect your mental resilience. For me, it's, I don't have trouble learning things new. I'm in tech. I have to learn things new all the time. It's kind of a burden. But for me, I have to remind myself to walk away from the screen and go outside. There's a real world out there that has nothing to do with what I'm seeing on my computer. It's shocking, but true. Moving around, getting regular sleep. Sleep patterns for tech people are spotty. So I have a quick hack for you that I discovered. It works for me. I ran across this Consumer Reports article about blue blocking glasses. And I read you can read this article. You don't have to be a subscriber to see it. That those ones at the top, those are these. And they were like $15 and the others were over $100. And these are the ones that won. Go get them on Amazon, $15. You put them on 2.5 hours before you try to go to bed and you will be sleepy. Now, whether or not you go to bed on time, that's another matter. But, at least you're setting yourself up for success. Number 2, try very hard to reject the rage. I don't know if you noticed, but there's rage everywhere online. Everywhere. It's the new addiction, and media empires literally are being built on it, as well as cottage industries. There's money to be made. It's flowing. It's hard to resist. this is going to be an ongoing thing. This is something you'll have to work on all the time. I have to work on it constantly. But I will say I got a lot out of this particular short, it's not very long, little video that this journalist put up at the last voting village at DEF CON. I would invite you to check it out. He's got a kind of an interesting take on fake news. And I particularly like that headline. Sometimes if I'm reading something that just makes me outrageous, I just look at that and say, you know, it's going to come from a basement in Macedonia. So, yeah. Oops, there we go. Third one, take the long view. This one also helps me. History is a great teacher, and it's a good perspective setter. And with that, we're going to go into election history. And there's our first headline. Once upon a time, when our republic was much younger, voting was not anonymous. Did you know that? I did not know that until recently. To me, voting anonymously is a sacred right. The government never gets to know how I voted. So I just assumed it's been a right from the beginning, but it's not been. There was a time when it wasn't a right. And as you can guess, that created a lot of dishonest voting. People were afraid to show how they voted, so sometimes they didn't. People got harassed when they did. And worst of all, votes became a commodity to be bought and sold. Then, in 1888, the state of Massachusetts was the first state in the United States of America to adopt the secret ballot. They made a ballot that was the same for everybody. People voted, they didn't have to sign their name, and then the ballots were counted by hand. And that, in my opinion, was the very first American secure election. I set a bar you can still hold some elections to today. Okay, and then next, in 1882, just a few years later, you had the invention of the first voting tech. It was the gear and lever voting machine. It was used in Lockport, New York. The lever machine made anonymous voting possible, and it made overvotes, you know, accidentally voting for more than one candidate in a race, impossible. So lever machines made elections not only more fair and secure, but also more accurate. By 1930, the lever machines were being used in every major city in the United States. They were monstrosities. They were hard to steal, at least. They were built to last forever. Lever machines had a long run, but they were hard to move around, and they were, as we discovered, sadly, like with most tech, not unhackable. Now, we set up rules to deter that. Commissions would say that only two people could unlock and open the back of a lever, so you always had the eyes on the other person. But sometimes those rules weren't followed, and results on the back could be changed, supposedly, so that was a thing, and sometimes the gear stuck. All of the gear and lever voting machines were decommissioned by 2012. They made one brief comeback in 2013 in New York because the election in 2012 had long lines in New York because their new tech broke. Speaking of new tech, there was also a flurry of tech inventions in the 60s and 70s. I've got a few listed here. Punch machines became really popular using in conjunction with optical scanners. So it was a matter of you could get more voters through. It didn't take as long to count. Punch card machines combined with optical scanners for counting were at that time the next leap forward for election tech. Much lighter, easier to use in theory, easier to scan in theory. But punch card machines fell out of favor with everyone for forever because of the presidential election of the year 2000. The year of
the Chad.
Yes, the hanging Chad. For those of us who remember the hanging Chad election of 2000, you know what I mean when I say that was all that was on the news on everybody's news channels 24/7. For those of you who are young or were pre-born into the year 2000, Go to Wikipedia and look up 2000 United States presidential election recount in Florida. Wikipedia actually has a great comprehensive article on this. Spoiler, the courts ended up deciding that presidential election. And hanging chads were not just a Florida problem. Get this, nationwide, 2 million ballots were disqualified and thrown out due to issues tied to the punch machine optical scanner combos. And if you throw in problems that various places had with inaccurate purges of voter registration records, some studies put the lost vote count for 2000 as high as 6 million. So although they'd had problems with some of this technology for several years, that kind of created the tipping point. Congress said, it's the 21st century now. Why are we still putting up with this old tech? Update your tech, everyone. Here's the specs you need to follow, and here's the money to do it with. Well, the money clinched the deal. And that was the Help America Voting Act of 2002. A couple of years after the Help America Voting Act passed, President Carter, Democrat, James Baker, Republican who served in the Reagan administration, they put together a bipartisan commission that put out some election reform recommendations on top of what was in the act. And a quote from that report I have right here, it showed how Americans were finally beginning to realize that the bar for election security and accuracy needed to be raised again. Of significance to us in this discussion is that phrase, obsolete voting machines. Keep that in mind. Okay, but before we move on, I just want to take one more look at those incredible gear and lever machines, the first ones. The very first voting machines helped America significantly improve voting security and accuracy. It made anonymous voting a pillar of our election process. The first election machine helped make that possible. During that date span you see there, we saw huge changes, not just in how we voted, but who could vote. During that date span, we made great advances towards making this country a more perfect union. If you are ever tempted to despair over the state of elections today, I want you to think of this picture and I want you to just remember how far we've come. And then I want you to think about how you can do your part to help continue to push to make things better. Okay, so 2000 was a bit of a dumpster fire, and Congress passed the Help America Vote Act with serious money attached. There was hope that this would finally encourage the free market to give voting technology the real boost of innovation it needed. Unfortunately, what we have at the moment is a near monopoly, due in part to the litigious nature of the lead companies. See this article, but certainly also due to the important legal process of certification. Okay, when I talk certification here, I'm not talking about the certification of election results after Election Day. That's separate. What I'm talking about here is certification of the actual voting machines. And as I understand it, so take this with a grain of salt, as I understand it, I think it's sort of like when you manufacture a microwave that has to meet certain standards, you take it to a state-approved testing facility and you pay to get it tested. That certification is for that model. If you have new models with enough variation, those models are going to have to get their own certification. Well, the Help America Vote Act required something similar to that for voting machines. Federal certification guidelines are voluntary, but almost all the states have adopted them and they've piled on a few of their own. This brings us to the Election Assistance Commission, the EAC. They set the federal requirements. Right now, companies are operating under the requirements set in 2005. So the manufacturers, when they have their machines tested, they have to foot the cost for that testing to get their tech certified. So certification makes sense when it comes to making sure if voting tech meets the long list of requirements that for what it needs to do. But it does not work so well under the Patch Tuesday model of security updates. This is why you have so much old tech in the voting machine world. And this is why, in part, you don't have a lot of official penetration testing going on yet. So the EAC is coming out with new certification guidelines finally. So that new is good. From 2005 to, I guess it's going to be 2022, new is good. Not everything in there is popular. If you are concerned about voting machines being able to connect to the internet, you may be interested in this video from the most recent Voting Village at DEF CON. She talks about that. But some of the things in there are wins. For example, the EAC is trying to launch a pilot pen testing program, and if you're a pen tester, that's something you might want to look into. Also, a useful video in the DEF CON Voting Village channel for pen testers is this one. And I know he's a fellow Texan, I believe he's associated with Austin hackers, so go watch his video, give a fellow Texas hacker a boost. It's also very interesting and full of information. All right. So, we're at year 2000. That election spurred Congress to pass the 2002 Help America Voting Act. Counties and states went shopping. Okay, now the next thing up is the presidential election of 2004. Lots of accusations in Iowa, of all places, Ohio, the other mostly vowel state. In Ohio, there are accusations of voter suppression, machine malfunction, and recount shenanigans. 2 elected officials are convicted in 2007 of said shenanigans, so that was a thing. Fast forward to 2008, and although this isn't directly on the voting system, both major political campaigns were hacked. I actually don't remember that, I guess because I wasn't really paying much attention back then. So I thought it kind of all started with the 2016 campaign hacks, but no, it was happening way before then. Also, there was this, and this was actually really big news at the time. So this is way before Voting Village. So there were other people looking at this even before DEF CON was looking at it, and this was pretty. I mean, go look this up. This was pretty earth-shaking to the election community because there were a lot of those machines in service. Now, when this was discovered, this company that made the voting machines had 2 years earlier sold itself to ES&S, the market leader. So I don't know if anybody actually caught the heat on this one, but that was a thing. Okay, and then 2012 election. Okay, so this was news to me. A voter took a video of a voting machine while he was trying to vote, and he kept pressing the Obama choice, and it kept checking the Romney choice. So so this was, look, there's 10 million views. It had its moment, right? A lot of people have laid eyes on this video. That machine was removed from service, but I'm going to bet that this video had an impact on some people and how they perceive the security of our election machines. The article that I found this reference in also had a quote from Pamela Smith of Verified Voting, and she said, multiple reports of calibration problems with e-voting machines, the type of problem that results in vote flipping, occurred in Virginia, Nevada, Texas, North Carolina, and Ohio. She said that in 2012. So 2012 was a bad year for DREs, also known as direct recording electronic machines, touchscreen voting equipment that lack any paper backup for later recount. This brings us to a very important discussion in election tech: paper trails. If 2012 had been a close election, all those DRE disasters would have been a much bigger deal in the news than they were. If election tech can break, how can you capture the true intent of the voter? Well, with paper backups. And not just any paper backup. One that is verified by the voter themselves before the vote is counted. So this is a good time to introduce this website, the Verifier. Okay, at this point, I am going to escape out of my slides and go to a browser, so bear with me for just a moment. Okay, there we go. So Verified Voting is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that is devoted to trying to make our election voting tech better and the systems better. So they have this great database called the Verifier. Let's go there. And the Verifier is a searchable database maintained by by Verified Voting. It's a database of all the election tech used in U.S. elections, and it is searchable by state and county. So this is important for this talk because I want you to know, if you see a state, county, or city mentioned specifically in an election vulnerability or hack claim, you can go to this site, the Verifier, and you can find out what tech they're using. There have been some claims that are accurate when they cite the type of tech that's being used, and there are some that were obviously just doing wild guesses. This is where you can find out what was really used. Okay, on the Verifier map, and let's go back, let's go down to where we can see that. Okay. On the Verifier map, green is good. So you can dive into the site and get more information about what all their little nuances of the colors mean. But essentially, green is good, red is bad. So what do they think of as good? They say that good is having a paper ballot, a voter verifiable paper ballot at the end of the voting experience. And they also consider hand-marked paper ballots to be better than machine-printed ballot confirmations. And I think it's probably because it has more, the vote record has more attention from the voter than just getting a printout at the end that you look over. But that said, a paper record that a voter can verify is better than no paper record. So, can you 100% trust voting machines? I would say no. So you must have another way to check the vote. And there is no better way than to have the voter check the vote. It's an extremely simplified way to look at it, but that is kind of essentially what I'm saying here. And I have a slide I want to go to before we go to the next section. So let me go back to that, and we will click that, and oops. There we go. Okay, there it is. All right, another disclaimer. This is, okay, I wrote this. This is not certified by anybody. It's not endorsed by anybody. Take it at your own risk. But this makes sense to me. This makes sense as a logic path for how can I kind of look at how somebody's running an election and kind of filter through how is there a basic trustworthiness to it? Okay, so number one, voting machines can be hacked. So if your precinct is not using a voting machine, it's just handwritten ballots all the way, cool. You're good to go. You don't even have to go through the rest of this list. But if you are like in my precinct, you have a voting machine, go on to number two. Do you get a chance to verify in a printout what you voted? So if you can't do that, then that's something that you need to, that's a problem you need to bring up with your election board and where you vote. Tell them that you want to have a paper trail. That would be worth looking up in the new Texas election laws. Is that something that because they're going to be doing risk limiting audits at some point, so it's got to be based on something. So hopefully that'll be something that Texas will be able to say yes to and turn green all over our state. All right, so paper printouts are, once the voters verified them, put in the vote machine, it's been counted. Paper printouts, are they then stored? Well, actually, does the voter get to put it in storage? And then from that point, from the moment the voter's fingers leave the ballot, does that ballot have a chain of custody, a documented chain of custody from that moment on to the moment that it no longer has to be stored and they destroy it? If you cannot say that to yes, you still have problems in your system. There must be chain of custody, because this might come as a shock, but not only can you not 100% trust voting tech, you also can't 100% trust people. So systems that don't rely upon being able to trust individuals necessarily, but have checks and balances also for people, is a good system to have. All right, so number 4, if you made it all to number 4, then that's going to be talking about the ability to do some kind of audit. Spot audits, surprise audits, just to make sure that what your machine's counted matches the sample that the stats kind of match. If you want to learn more about what the risk limiting audit is, and that's kind of the hot new audit term these days, there's a lot of videos talking about that on the Voting Village YouTube, but you can also go to a site called trustthevote.org, do a search for risk limited audit, and I think they've got an article on it. Lots of people have articles on it. It's the up and coming thing. Okay. At this point, I want to kind of go over a few little scenarios. You might have heard about some audit drama that was going on in Arizona and some of the theories behind that audit drama. And I want to use some of the, I want to go back to this, I think, and also and I want you to remember the verified voting, what you can look up there. And I want to go through a couple of the things the theories that were associated with why people why some people wanted an audit in Arizona. I recognize that is an emotionally charged subject, because it was super hard to find any articles that they weren't colored either blue or red. So what I want to do, let's escape out of this again. I'm going to go to an article that I pulled up, and maybe we'll just go through and just pick out a few things. It was this one. It was from a local station, I think, out there. And so they're talking about it. And this is kind of something that I gleaned from Bob Sullivan's video. You want to, anytime you're dealing with something, especially political things, there's going to be like 99% of it's going to be a lot of emotion and speculation, but somewhere in there may actually be some facts that you can work with. So we're going to try to look for those. Okay, so one of the claims here that they're talking about is the allegation that the voting machine being used there, Dominion software, changed votes, so basically flipped votes and did other stuff. So when he says doing all kinds of unfortunate things, I have no idea what that means, but I do know what changing votes means, because we just talked about how in 2012 there were a lot of DRE machines that were flipping votes. Essentially, they were not voting the way that the voter wanted them to vote. So that's something we can work with. So if we were researching this, we'd want to go to verified voting. We want to verify, first of all, where are they talking about? And are those machines by that manufacturer actually being used in that election? And then we're going to want to find out what are the machines and how are they being used. Once you've looked up what machines are being used in that county, you're going to want to, verified voting lets you click through to the machine and read what the machine does. And sometimes these machines are creating an appropriate paper trail that's verified by the voter. And if that's the case, like that logic flow, your investigation has kind of come, not completely to an end, but it's come to the point where you have to ask, okay, if I were going to hack an election this way in that location, how could I overcome the audit trail that's going to be totally different than the electronic machine vote count? So I think this particular claim depends upon voting machine count only, and they're not taking into account an audit. If there's not audit capabilities in place, then this is something you might look into. But if there are audit capabilities in place, I'm not sure they have as much standing as they might think they have. Another one I would like to throw out there, I have to say it's one of my favorites. Because it's one of my favorites because people got so freaked out about it. And this is the bamboo paper theory. So and I can't even pull up an article like this that it's even halfway, not emotional. So I'll just tell you that. So I'm sure you heard about that. Some votes were flipped because of a special type of paper that had certain fibers in it that were really screwing with the optical scanner machines. And that came in a variety of different stories. So depending on where you heard it from, depended on some of the details. But if you boiled it down, it kind of boils down to, remember the problems that we had in the 80s, 90s, 2000s with some of the old optical scanners. They would not read the votes properly, and so you had in 2000 you had 2 million votes that were thrown out. That is unacceptable to us today. We have raised the bar. You cannot do that today. So if you boil it down to, can a piece of material that the ballot is on screw with the optical scanner that counts the votes and make it count the votes incorrectly? That answer would be, and maybe. It depends on what machine you're using. Have you tested it for that? So ways to see, I think questions to ask, if that could be possible. If you were thinking, okay, if I were going to do that hack, or if I were going to verify whether or not this was done, one of the first questions I would ask is, did they use the paper that the ballots were on, regardless of whether it had bamboo or not? The paper that the ballots were ultimately printed on, was that paper the same paper that they used in their testing? And how did that turn out? The other thing would be, again, we're back to that paper ballot audit trail. Is there a paper ballot audit trail that was a paper ballot that was verified by the voter? Because again, you have these two different counts that you can compare. If they do not match up, they will throw anomalies. If something's happening on the election, on the text side, you will see it in the numbers. And this video at DEF CON that Harry Hershey did, Harry walks through a situation that he was called in on to investigate that isn't pretty much exactly that. So this is super fascinating. He walked you through the entire process. I loved this video. Watch it. This is very much a story of, here's what happened, and we're just following where the evidence leads us. And sometimes the evidence leads you into places that are surprising. So I'll just say that. Okay, and then the last thing I want to highlight for you that I think is going to be a great resource as you try to understand election claims for yourself. You ever wonder about, has anybody ever actually gotten arrested, persecuted, arrested, prosecuted, and had to go to jail over voter fraud? People talk about voter fraud all the time. Has anybody ever been arrested? This is the site where you go to. It's a great database. And so I will leave you with that. You can pull up your Texas and any other state and look to see, what are we actually good at catching? So thank you for listening. And that is my talk, and I hope you feel a little bit more empowered.